Now, I'm happy to introduce to you Beverly Armento. Some of her good friends are here. They already know her. She graduated from William Patterson University, Purdue University, and got her doctorate at Indiana University. And she taught at Georgia State, had a 50-year career in education. It's really an amazing career. But on top of all of that, she finally has decided to write this memoir. For you that have already read it, it's one of the most powerful memoirs I've ever read. And I was very moved by it. And I know you have been too. And if you haven't read it, you have, I can't say what it will mean to you, but I know it will be meaningful in some way. So I'm going to ask her some questions and let her tell you whatever she wants to tell you, and then we will open it up for Q&A. But Beverly, we thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And the first question I want to ask you is, I have been told by my writing friends that writing a memoir is probably the hardest thing they've ever done. What would you say?
First of all, I'd really like to thank Dr. Curry for inviting me here today, and I thank all of you for joining us. But this book was always in the back of my mind, but you know, I was busy. I had a busy life. You know, when you teach, you don't have an awful lot of spare time on your hands. But I really did think someday I'll write about my early life. But in retirement, you know, I just did funny things. I first thought, oh, I'm supposed to have a hobby, you know? So I took every class imaginable. And, you know, I thought there's so much artistic talent in my family, surely I have some. Well, no, I don't. No. You know, stained glass, mosaics, even making kaleidoscopes. I had trouble, and you know, the final product was not something you send to your Aunt Lena. But in any case, finally there was a writing class at the Sproul Center near me, and I thought, writing, sure, I know how to do that. I've done plenty of it in my life as a professional educator, and I can write, so let's take a creative writing class. And honestly, when I took the class, I was not thinking about the memoir. I just thought, let me take a writing class. So, let me find this. In the writing class, you know, about the third session or so, the teacher said, I'm going to give you a prompt, and you write about the prompt. So the prompt was hair, you know, hair. I said, okay, hair. So I sat down, and this is what came out of me. The first beating comes when I am 7. You're just like your father, she screams. No good. Taken. Taken. Her voice is shrill. She snatches me by my arms, yanks me off the crate, kicks me in my side. I curl into a ball and cry. Whoosh! A flood escapes from between my legs. I piddle all over the floor. She kicks me again and grabs my hair as she pulls me through the wet mess, wiping the floor with me, a mop. So I write that. And then it comes time for everybody to share. So when it was my turn to share, quite frankly, I could not read it. And so my friend sitting next to me, read the poem. And you know, when my voice cracked that day, that was the day that I said, I think you're ready to write this story. And that's exactly how it started. I love this photo of Mama, Alette Robinson. That was her name. And, you know, she had a rough life herself. Early in life, she was diagnosed with a rare eye disease. Nevertheless, like all of her siblings, she had great artistic talent. And she drew and drew and drew with her charcoal pencils.
I want you to just tell us a little bit about your mother's blindness, because I found that so fascinating for that period in time, and I'm sure we've made progress now, but I didn't realize a person could be blind and then they could get their seeing and then they could lose it again. Tell us a little bit about that.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. My mother had a rare eye disease. It's not well studied even today. My half-brothers got the disease also, and my living brother has had like 10 corneal transplants, because this disease kind of is in your body and comes back and reinfects the cornea. So you can receive a new cornea, clear and perfect, and it becomes clouded over. You know, the life from my mother was about 6 years for that first corneal transplant. But back in the late 40s and early 50s, she really had no hope that she would ever see again. By the time she had me, when she was 19, she was pretty much blind. She was blind. And she did have, by the time she received a corneal transplant in 1950, she had had 4 kids. The baby was very sick, hydrocephalic baby. And Mama had what we think, you know, you wind up having a lot of hypotheses about your life, because a lot of things you really don't know and you will never know. She was never really diagnosed, but it appears that when I was about 5, you know, you've read there was a traumatic event at the house, and I think it was during that period that she had this psychological break. So, of course, her mental state kind of always clouded everything in our lives. But sticking with the eyes for a moment, when we moved to Miami, she met Dr. Bascom Palmer, who at that time was an outstanding ophthalmologist. And, you know, way early in his career, he had this attitude that everybody, no matter what their class, economic class, no matter who they were, you know, where they lived, they should have access to high quality health care. So he worked through the Florida Lighthouse for the Blind to provide resources for surgeries. And you know, we were living in a housing project there in Miami. There was no money for surgery. And we really didn't have health insurance either. So by 1950, he was experimenting with a new procedure, the corneal transplant. And he said to my mother, "You're just the right candidate. You're the right person." Here's a woman who was blind, had 4 children, made not only their clothing, but slipcovers, draperies, and she was a terrific artist. Let me show you some of her artwork. You know, by 1939, when she drew these drawings, charcoal pencil drawings she was essentially blind. It's hard to believe that a person who couldn't see could do this intricate work. Those first 5 years of my life were wonderful for me. And every picture and every story that I've heard from people that were there then, I had a good life. I was loved by my mother and father. I felt secure in those relationships. I loved both of them. And when my father disappeared, I was broken. And when my mother lost her mind, I was devastated. And in addition to everything else that I lost. But yeah, what was your question?
I don't know either. I know you were expecting your mother to change.
Oh, yeah.
When she got her eyesight back.
I'm sorry.
And then that was such an emotional roller coaster for you as a child.
When I was 4 years old, Sharon joined the family. And here's a beautiful picture of the two of us. I'm 5, Sharon's a little more than a year. And this is how we looked when our life took a turning point.
When you talk about this, go back to that thing that there was something devastating that happened to her, you think, that made her lose her mind, or was there?
Well, I think she may have had some proclivity for mental instability. She came from a family, she had 6 brothers and a sister, and there's a lot of problem. 5 of the 6 boys turned out to be alcoholics, serious alcoholics. The 2 girls, my mother and Aunt Lena, had a number of personality problems. You know, one wonders what happened. You know, was there some sexual abuse over those girls when they were children? No one knows the answer to that. You know, again, these are hypotheses that you entertain. In the Woman's Home Companion article, my mother claims that my father was running around. Well, he might have been running around. You know, they were both beautiful people, physically. He was handsome and dashing and dark and Italian and lovely. And she was beautiful too. And, you know, there was a war and he was away. So, alas and alack, she brought in a lover. And, you know, she was the one who was caught. And it was awful. It was awful. And I think that's when I kind of had my little post-traumatic stress. But the mama that I remembered was that pre-fight mama. The mama who loved me. The mama who told me stories. The mama who painted with me, who took me to the park. You know, the sweet mama. And in my mind, and I was connected to that. Part of what starts to happen in this story, as well as every story of every kid who grows up in a dysfunctional home, they become codependent with the person with the problem. In this case, my mother. Over the years, I became very codependent with my mother. Even though I was frightened of her, even though I was angry, even though I was traumatized, you know, and that trauma for me, the physical and emotional abuse, became chronic. 17 years of it. 17. I guess you can call it chronic.
I would say.
Yeah. But in my mind, you know, it was terribly naive and childlike, but I always kept hoping maybe she'll get better, you know. But without any intervention, without any help, without any overt acknowledgement that this is a problem, it was not going to get better. This is a precious drawing for me because, well, for many reasons. First of all, she chose to draw me as her first subject, her first drawing.
You mentioned your mother was promiscuous, and she, as you got older and she lost her sight again, she would have men come into the apartment, and you and Sharon would be in the bedroom, and this man named Joe would come in the bedroom and sit on the bed. I just got very angry reading that segment, and he would rub your leg, and you didn't know what was going on, and you were frightened, and she even took you to this place. That was astounding to me that she wasn't protecting you, and that must have made you very angry.
Yeah, that's, you know, that's I guess you'd call it sexual abuse. And that went on for a long period of time. But, you know, and I was 15, you know, and here you're kind of growing up, and we were very naive. You know, nobody taught us about the birds and bees. And, you know, you couldn't look it up on Google, for sure. So, you know, it was all news to me. But, yeah, that was a pretty traumatic time in my life. And I think, you know, the eating problems happened right about then, too. And, you know, as you read the research, you know, there's a link between sexual abuse and things like eating disorders. Of course, you don't know any of that then. That's all just happening. But, you know, in one of my recent book clubs, one of the women commented about, you know, being taken to this dark house and this man really essentially molesting me. And, you know, she said to me, you know, that probably would have been the beginning of trafficking of you. And, you know, I never really thought about that. But, you know, probably, or possibly. I mean, that's where it's got to start somewhere. Where does it start? By getting these naive young girls involved in sexual activity in some way. It was very hard for me to believe that my mother kind of orchestrated that and continued to put my sister and me, you know, Sharon's 4 years younger than I, put us in danger. And these men, there'd be several men in the house most nights during this several-year time period. And there was a small apartment, and invariably, they'd be in our room.
When your mother got her sight back, and she was a lovely woman, and she could charm people, and magazines started coming to the house and doing articles about her. There was an article in Mademoiselle,
Yeah.
and another magazine, and she was even chosen to go on TV. And all of these things, she did a personality change.
Yes, yes.
And that was so amazing. But the incident that I'm referring to is she and her husband were invited to come to New York for 10 days. And she left you in charge of Sharon, who was 7, Ronnie, who was 4, and the baby was 1, and they were gone 10 days. And how old were you?
I was 11.
Isn't that unbelievable? And, you know, I have a grandchild that's about that age, and I would never leave that child in charge of all those things. But because of your, I guess, this nature that you had of taking care of everything, she thought you could take care of it, and I guess you did too. Did you have anybody you could get help from? Not really.
Not really. You know, the neighbor, Mrs. McKnight, I think I would call on her periodically, but there was no one who kind of looked in on us.
It was a miracle that nothing really bad
I
happened.
know.
I was talking with Beverly before about how they were invited to go on This Is Your Life. I mean, her mother's story was so miraculous, this blind woman that had 4 children, and they do these magazine articles and show her taking care of the kids and you helping. It was just, everything was happy. And she was so beautiful and charming. So they did This Is Your Life, and they flew you to Hollywood.
Yes, yeah.
And you said it was the first time you'd slept in a bed in like 7 years, or had a bath, and didn't have a bathroom where you could take a real bath, and all of these things. It was just such a contrast.
All this publicity led us to Hollywood, California, Ralph Edwards, and This Is Your Life. And here we are on stage, Sharon and me. Sharon's 8, I'm 12 at this time. And Mama, who's looking ever so beautiful, as always.
I remember as a child watching This Is Your Life, they'd hide people behind a curtain, and then they would come out, and we were laughing. This is sort of funny. Beverly was talking about her grandmother, that had you ever met her? Or you'd met her briefly?
I had, yeah.
But she had been estranged from her mother.
Right.
And the mother is introduced and comes out, and they just hug like, oh, they're so And then her sister comes out, Lena. They'd been estranged, and they just hug like there's and it's almost a comic scene.
It is.
Because this family was so dysfunctional, and they had not been around to help you during all of this. They lived a long way away, and your mother was alienated from them. But for that television show, it was like this big happy family. Your survival was amazing, and you talk about being 2 Beverlys, strong Beverly at school and weak Beverly at home, and how the teachers that you had really saved you. Talk about that.
Yeah, that's so important. You know, you learn to cope, to adapt to the situation you're in. And your comment earlier about living in chaos, you know, it is so true about any dysfunctional home is chaos, because you can't predict what's going to happen next. There's no stability. And, but, you know, you either learn to adapt or you don't. Not everybody does come through these situations very well. But part of my coping mechanism was to, I guess, I didn't consciously develop 2 sides of myself. And it's not like I had 2 personalities that were like Sybil and Thelma. You know, I wasn't that kind of a person. But when I was in school, that was safe. That was my happy place. And my teachers, I swear to you, they were all angels. And I felt they were there for me. In my mind, they cared for me, they encouraged me, they nurtured me, and me, I was so happy to be there. I was relieved of the stress from home. I tried to keep that like I always did in my professional life. When I walked over the threshold, I was strong Beverly, whether I was teaching or going to school. And strong Beverly was a happy girl, smiling. I was exactly the stereotype that so many abused kids become. They become the smiling, happy kid. So don't ever just watch yourself. Don't come to any conclusion when you meet a happy person or a happy kid. You have no idea what their landscape is and what has gone on before. One of my 6th grade students said to me after reading the book, if I knew this about you, when you got up in front of our class in Sarasota and said, "Hi, I'm Miss Armento, and I'm your teacher, and we're going to fly." He said, "I would have felt like I was standing on the rim of the Grand Canyon." And you know, that's what we should all feel like when we meet new people. That you don't know the landscape, you don't know what rivers have flown through. And my teachers did not know either. They may have had a hunch, they may have seen the bruises. Some teachers came to my home, the spelling bee teachers. You know, they got an eyeful and an earful that day. But in large part, in those days, teachers didn't take action. But they were there for me. And all the way through school, high school, college. And maybe I looked for surrogate parents. I'm sure I did. Because there's always been somebody, some surrogate father or surrogate mother in my life. And so I probably have sort of latched on to people because I needed them in my life, and they became my mentors. But those teachers were my mentors, and I really do believe that in today's world, we kind of need to go back to that notion of the importance of the teacher. Because teachers every day do for kids what my teachers did for me. They nurture those kids, especially vulnerable kids. And for vulnerable kids coming out of chaotic situations, they need stability, they need caring, they need guidance. They're looking for that. They need trusted adult mentors.
Now, suicide is such a problem. Our daughter teaches and has taught her entire career, and is so devastated occasionally when a student commits suicide. But I can certainly understand the way you grew up, how you would be driven to thoughts of suicide. The stepfather leaves home, and you're really left to take care after you graduate from college, and you would think, I'm finally going to be able to get away. Sharon goes to nursing school, and then lo and behold, you're expected to take care of your mother even after you've graduated from college, and they're the two young boys, and it just won't end, and it won't end. And that's when you really began to think about suicide, and that was such a scary time. But somehow you had the strength to leave. And I know that was a hard decision, but you had to leave to save your life.
Yeah, I'm afraid it came down to that. And, you know, it was really a dark period. Of course, it was my first year of teaching, too. And, you know, when my fourth graders, who are now in their 70s, read the book, they were shocked. As most of my friends and students have been. Because, you know, I was, you know, kind of like what I call the invisible walking wounded. You know, you got a face to the world, but, you know, you're dealing with something pretty serious. So every day I got up and taught my class, and I was joyous in class. I had to turn off my desperation and my sorrow. And aren't I lucky I did it? Because I sort of had years of practice. You know, I know how to do these things. I know how to suppress my emotions. I know how to lie. You know, I bumped into a door. That's how I got that black eye. I know how to, you know, I know how to not trust people. I know how to blow up relationships. I know how to do those things real well. I was quite accomplished. So I was able to turn on strong Beverly and turn off weak Beverly. And you know, I guess Weak Beverly was also the place where I kept my emotional self, because I had such a separation of my cognitive self from my emotional self that became a major problem for me as an adult, trying to come to grips with all the problems that I brought out of the trauma of childhood. And even though for a long time I thought I was just fine, I could take care of all this myself, I couldn't. And it took me 20 years after I walked away from home to the tune of a 13-state alarm, and people say, well, you're free. You're out of there. Well, I was out of the home, but I was not free of my trauma. All of that is with you. As Bessel van der Kolk says so well in his book, The Body Keeps the Score. And if you're interested in these topics, you must look for that. The body keeps the score. It was always with me. And it's still there, it's right there. And it took me a long, long time to realize that I needed professional help to unravel all of the issues that I so expertly carried along with me through a master's program, a doctoral program, being hired at Georgia State, getting promoted to associate professor, being a great teacher, blah, blah, blah. Wasn't she wonderful? Got all these awards, wrote all these articles, So that was my cognitive self, my achievement self. Meanwhile, my emotional self, I still had nightmares. I was afraid my mother would find me and kill me. I broke into sweats. I was highly anxious, eating disorder problems, obsessive compulsive all the way, depressed. All of that was still going on, but I was not paying attention to it. So, when I look at that, I think, how the heck did you survive, you fool? And why didn't you get some help?
But you finally did get good help for a number of years, and I think you're a walking miracle. We're so glad that you've had the courage to tell your story, and I can tell you get emotional, and I can get emotional while you're telling it. But we admire you for being able to talk about it, and I think it brings home to us and reminds us what the young people are going through today. And it's just horrifying, but we're thankful for the teachers. We have teachers and librarians in this group and nurses, and you make a difference. And it's so important how you interact with young people.
We are really in a rough time right now. When the Surgeon General says mental health is the defining health issue of our times, we all need to be paying attention.
This has been one of the best programs we've ever done in Women Alone Together. It's really lifted us all up, and I'm so glad that we've made a video of it that we could pass on to other people. And as I said earlier, you're a walking miracle, and we appreciate you.
Oh, I appreciate you and every one of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.